This debt ceiling crisis is going to be entirely different from the previous debt ceiling crisis that you've seen many times over the last few years. Everyone's got debt ceiling fatigue where they think it's the same as always and they don't want to listen to it and they just figure we'll fix it and we'll raise the debt ceiling and everything will be okay. It's different this time, and I know that's the four most dangerous words in the stock market. It's different this time, but in this situation, it is different. Let me explain to you exactly why this is not your grandfather's debt ceiling crisis. This is a new problem that could go off the rails if it goes the wrong way. Please understand that nothing in this video is intended as personalized trading advice for you. So what's the debt ceiling even about? It's about whether or not the Treasury Department is going to pay the bills that the American government has already benefited from. For example, you're a federal worker, you worked for a couple of weeks, you expect to get paid for that. The Treasury Department does not have the authorization to pay certain bills, and it'll include that, and it just doesn't get paid unless they raise the debt ceiling. And now we're on a countdown to June where we have not defaulted yet. We're just arguing about the debt ceiling. But in June, apparently we're going to be running out of money again. And if we don't fix the debt ceiling, we are going to be defaulting officially. But we'll get into whether or not the U.S. has ever defaulted on their debt and if they're going to do it now later in this video. But there's a lot of bills and expenses that have already been taken on by the federal government. The most recent debt ceiling limit issue was in 2011. We got close to it, and that had many effects on the economy. Some things increased, some things decreased. What decreased? Business confidence. Consumer confidence fell off a cliff. And what increased at that same time? Interest rates, mortgages, auto loans. As we approached the possibility of not raising the debt ceiling and not paying what the government owes. That was at a time, 2011, with a Democratic president and a Republican House of Representatives, just like now. But just to put it in perspective, since 1960, how many times has Congress raised the debt ceiling? Since 1960, about 63 years, it was 78 times. They're raising the debt ceiling more than once a year on average. But here's the rub. Here's where the mud's going to hit the fan, possibly. Do you remember recently when the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, kept trying to become Speaker of the House, and he kept not doing it? 15 times they reran that election, and each time he gave more concessions. For example, one individual can remove him from the Speaker of the House position rather than it requiring a lot of people. That's just one example of the concessions. Each level of concessions got more draconian, more significant, until he basically sold the farm to get that position, the Speaker of the House. What this does is it gives a lot more power to fewer people. It's not just about removing them from the Speaker of the House position. They change a lot of the ways things work, and the end result is that there's a lot more power in the hands of people who are potentially saboteurs, who want to affect the outcome, who want to hold the economy hostage. It'll be a lot easier to hold the economy hostage. And I know that you're always going to be trying to put the country above the party, and the debt ceiling crisis is about the country. But what about when one individual, one small group of people decides that they want to put themselves above both the party and the country? Basically, there's a lot more power in the hands of fewer people, and that puts you in a situation where a smaller group of people can decide that they want to derail the train. And I'll tell you a story about my own son. He was fully potty trained finally, and then as soon as we had another kid, he completely reverted and went back and didn't potty train properly at all. That was the only way he knew to exert power, to get the attention, to be the squeaky wheel. I guess I should say the stinky wheel. That's equivalent to what can happen now with this budget debate, the debt ceiling debate. Anytime you make it possible for one person to have a significant effect easily, they will do that, even when it's not in the best interest of the country or of you. A lot of this is going to result in They're being more of an aggressive and solid stance about balancing the budget, which historically, anytime the budget gets balanced, you're going to be walking into a recession, but it doesn't matter because we are already walking into one anyway. And this is an example of the short-term pain that I think that we should take for a longer-term gain. The way that the government works, it's all about short-term gratification. Let's just raise the debt ceiling and worry about it later. Raise the debt ceiling and worry about it later. Let's have our grandchildren pay off the debts that we rack up now. And we'll worry about it later, not worry about it at all. They can worry about it. Well, guess what? You are the grandkids that we're talking about in this analogy. What we know to be a fact, you'll agree with me, I believe, is that in this debt ceiling crisis and debate and rigmarole, they're going to leave it to the last minute. It won't get fixed until it's very close to the time when it needs to absolutely get fixed. We also know for a fact that any results out of this will not even come close to fixing the actual long-term problem of fiscal irresponsibility. They're overspending. We're not bringing in enough money. We're not being efficient enough with the money that we bring in. But these are all problems for another discussion. I feel like a lot of the politicians and the Federal Reserve representatives are all just trying to run out the clock at the back of their mind, maybe subconsciously. But you've heard about extraordinary measures, and you might wonder, what are those? Because they talk about it all the time as if almost like a way to not have to tell you what they're actually doing. Oh, it's extraordinary measures. It's unpayable liabilities, everybody. Don't worry about it. It's blue debt. It's not green debt. Don't worry about blue debt. The real problem is orange debt. But anyways, what are the extraordinary measures? For example, they're changing the way that they conduct the accounting. They're talking about cuts to Social Security and Medicare. That would be an extraordinary measure. It's basically just a way of saying that they're fumbling around and changing whatever they have to behind the scenes to find a way to make our economy work. Well, shame on us. If you can't get the American economy to work, that's absolutely irresponsibility and incompetence. We've got two coasts, a bunch of people, nobody around us to invade us, plenty of resources, plenty of technology. And look what we're doing with it. The potholes even have potholes. And by the way, as I mentioned in the recent video, the three-stage economic knockout, we're going to go to the archives. I'll show you exactly what I said. The debt ceiling currently stands at $31.4 trillion and has been modified more than 100 times since World War II. Once the debt limit is reached, the Treasury Department will begin implementing extraordinary measures to delay a default in order to avoid a financial crisis. In one of my recent videos, I mentioned that among a lot of corporations and individuals, the U.S. government will default. And someone made a comment that they didn't agree with that, and I totally get that, and I should have explained it better anyway. The U.S. government is one of many organizations that will default on its debt at some point in the near future. Here's why some worry that it could result in Social Security and Medicare delays and proposals to cuts for those programs. You see what happens? I told you about this. This is even just like I was saying with the pension crisis. That they say, well, you got to contribute more and we're going to pay you out less and there's fewer services. The big argument I always get is that American government has a printing press. They can just create as much money as they need to pay down the debts. Yes, that's absolutely correct. But what you're saying then is that, Peter, don't worry about it. The government has the ability to destroy the purchasing power of the currency that we all use while taking on more debt that you will be on the hook for. That in itself would be a default through inflation. There's actually many types of default. There's a hard default where you owe somebody a bunch of money and you go, I'm not paying you. There's a soft default where you say, let's work out a payment plan, or let's give you 20 cents on the dollar and we'll call it even. You can default through inflation as we are right now. And we're actually defaulting through inflation at a faster rate than we ever have, mainly in recent years. Another way to default is to reword or rejig the U.S. debt ceiling wording. There's structural defaults, logistical defaults. For example, the very fact of being in the current situation, where you have uncertainty of federal workers going to be getting paid for the hours that they've worked? The uncertainty of whether or not we're going to pay the bills we've already taken on and benefited from as a nation, such as public sector workers, federal workers. And to be clear, I'm not saying that I think we're going to have a hard default. I'm saying that we're going to have a default through inflation. It's more politically expedient, and that they will raise the debt ceiling at the last moment, at the point where the individuals each have the most power, because we're at the absolute end of the road and it gets to be more and more serious as you get there. We're about to default. That gives one person incredible power if they want to be a fiscal saboteur. And I'm always not trying to scare you, but you should be getting scared by about every one of these videos I put out, because I'm telling you the truth of what's going on, the reality of it. That should scare you. So you might ask, Peter, has the U.S. government ever defaulted on their debts? Ever? Yeah, a few times. 1862, 1933, 1968, most recently 1971. That's when Nixon directed Secretary Connolly to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold. And the suspension of the convertibility of the dollar into gold became, of course, a permanent thing, which allowed for unlimited printing of dollars by the Federal Reserve from that point to this. And then Connolly, the Treasury Secretary, he said to his international counterparts, "The dollar is our currency, but it's your problem." We almost defaulted in 2011, but we did not. And now maybe one more default to come in the near future would be in 2023. I'm not saying we're going to default. I'm saying that we're going to come as close to default. Maybe we default because there's more power in the hands of smaller groups of people right now. And what happens on September 30th? The fiscal year 2024 budget needs to get passed. That's going to be involved with a lot of this political wrangling. This is all going to be about cutting spending and balancing the budget. But expect at least that we'll get very close to the absolute day where we're unable, or we decide that we're not going to pay the bills that we owe. And it's going to affect every government worker, every retiree, everybody engaged in this confidence-driven economy. But to leave it on a high note so that when you walk away from this video, you got a smile on your face and you say, "That Peter, he's a really optimistic guy." Understand that a lot of good can come out of this. Maybe we'll get billionaires to pay taxes. Maybe there'll be some of the massive spending cuts that we absolutely need immediately right now if we want to fix this problem. We need to lean into efficiency so that we're spending half to get twice the results of every government department. It won't be that difficult. You just have to know how to do it. But a good conversation is like a roller coaster. Sometimes you go up, sometimes you go down. I just took you up and taking you back down now. What we do know is that the Treasury Department and all the representatives of the economy and the government, they will not just fix the problem. They'll delay it. They'll choose instant gratification over long-term gratification, which is what politicians who have a shelf life must do.